I was in Malta last summer and in a rock pool I found two crab moulds. This little guy is the marbled rock crab and it's native to the Mediterranean, so no surprises there. This is the Sally Lightfoot crab and it's an invasive species, that is one that's not native, gets introduced usually by humans and causes havoc in the ecosystem. However, studies have shown that it doesn't seem to have affected the abundance or diversity of the native decapod crustaceans. So could this be a friendly alien? This is the Sally Lightfoot crab, and it's an invasive species. It's native to the American Atlantic, and it was first discovered in Italy in 1999. It was discovered around the Greek island of Rhodes around 2003. It's since spread to the whole of the Mediterranean, and it's one of the most invasive marine species we know of. However, recent studies have shown that it doesn't seem to have changed the abundance or the diversity of the decapod crustaceans around that area. So why is this? The answer is probably the results of a study which investigated the stomach contents of the Sally Lightfoot crab and found that it was strictly herbivorous. Now if we compare that to the other Mediterranean crabs, for example our marbled rock crab from before, this guy's favourite food is mussels, limpets and its own species. Mediterranean crabs are usually carnivorous or omnivorous. We might therefore conclude that the Sally Lightfoot crab has managed to settle into its own ecological space, its own niche, where it doesn't compete with the other crabs, and in doing so isn't causing any trouble whatsoever. However, ecosystems are very complex networks of interactions between lots of different animals and plants and all sorts, so it's very difficult to tell whether this is actually going to be a so-called friendly alien in the long run. One of the big questions plaguing biologists today then is how do you tell which species is going to become a problem and which one will just settle into its ecosystem without causing any trouble? One way to think about what makes a good invasive species is to think about the traits that would make you good at invading somewhere. So for example, better growth rate. However, there doesn't seem to be any universal traits which are common across all invasive species, so this approach isn't very good. There are many hypotheses. For example, there's a novel bioweapon hypothesis which suggests that invasive species have a new weapon that's unfamiliar to the creatures in its new environment, which give it a competitive edge. One of the most popular hypotheses is called ACRE, which stands for Evolution of Increasing Competitive Ability. It's the idea that because an invasive species doesn't have any natural predators in its new environment, it's able to reallocate resources away from defences and towards growth and development, which gives it the competitive advantage, hence evolution of increasing competitive ability. Now, this suggests that an invasive species isn't necessarily evolutionarily fitter than any others when it first enters that ecosystem. Therefore, one way to think about the problem is to think, well, what makes a species evolve quicker? There are loads of different answers to this. You can have a larger gene pool, hybridisation is a good way to mix your genes, and there's cool things like evolutionary capacitance. However, this is an unsolved problem, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to end there.